Throughout history, freethinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi and with me is Armin Navabi. Armin, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. And if you're watching this live and if you're in the United States, just want to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody. And, I guess there's a lot to be thankful for and, all that stuff. But the first thing I want you guys to do is while you're watching right now, take a second to hit the under this video.
Wait, your audio is getting cut. Let me tell everybody your audio is getting choppy for me.
No.
Just guys, if you're listening to the public version of this, make sure you like the video, make sure you subscribe to the channel, make sure you hit the bell notification, make sure you recommend our show, especially this show, because this is important and not that many people are talking about it. Okay, guys, we have to I don't understand why this is not like everywhere right now. It really shows how people. I don't want to become too judge. Like right now, I don't want to go on a rant. But the fact that we here have to make a sacrifice over talking about things that are actually very important versus what actually makes the channel grow. So if you want to make sure that we do continue speaking about things that need to be talked about, even though there's not that much demand for it, if you think that's important, please help us get this podcast with more people, okay? Especially with our YouTube channel. Recommend it, share it, like the videos, leave a comment after the video is over, especially this one. Like right now, the video version of this is for Patreon only. The audio version of this is going to be public. Once the audio version come out, tell people this news is important. Not that many people are talking about it, and they should be. This is about civilians being killed and the investigation of it being silenced, and we're talking about this happening from the world hegemon that is supposed to be taking on the role of creating stability, world order, human rights. This is the superpower that we have right now that is meant to be fulfilling that role, and we think it's not the cost associated with the world hegemon just killing 50 to 70 women and children without any investigation and shutting it, everyone trying to investigate it, being shut down, intimidated, fired, silenced. This done by a government that claims to be on the side of human rights, making human rights the leading metric at which it leads the rest of the world by. When this is coming from that institution and that world hegemon, the cost is beyond just the 50 to 70 women and children who died. I know this sounds like really cold because I just said just 50 and 70 women and children that died, but the cost is even more than that. As horrible as that cost is, the cost is that we don't have an entity, we don't have an effective force to challenge other countries' human rights record, which is astronomically higher, right? When we have the U.S. administration, the U.S. government trying to silence the people who are trying to investigate this horrible airstrike, you become extremely less effective in being the force that holds Saudi Arabia, Iran, China, Russia, Belarus, all of these other powers. You cannot hold them accountable because the force that you're trying to do the accountability has so many problems itself that it has no credibility internationally to be the force that brings that harmony to the world. Okay, so the cost is way beyond the people who died here. But anyways, we will go and
so
tell you the details. But yeah, go ahead.
Let's talk about this. And I think the general point is really important. This is why I actually think it's really important for, if you're listening to this, like, really go and subscribe to this YouTube channel and everything, because I have been frustrated, and I was telling Armin this before we went live, is that in the last 4 years or something, during the time that Trump was in power, there was so much news that was just US centric and American centric that I just don't hear, like the way it was before, Armin, is that I used to see international news and things like this that were going on. We used to hear about it all the time. Like, remember when Gary Johnson, they asked him about Aleppo, and he said, "Oh, what is Aleppo?" And then everybody was completely shocked. Like, how do you not know what Aleppo is? Well, now I can tell you that if you talk to most people, they probably wouldn't know anything that's happening, or especially like this thing that we're going to talk about today about the cover up. But let's just talk about the topic. Don't know what we're going
one
on
other thing I want to say, even among our own audience, like you can see that a show like this is getting a lot less attention, right? Like, we usually have more people here, even among our patrons, right? But we don't with this one, because it's more interesting even to our audience when we go after human rights violations by Iran or Saudi Arabia, or ridiculous ideas spread by even like Hindutva. Okay, but then when we want to come and hold the United States accountable for their war crimes, and I'm not exaggerating. This was a war crime, okay? Not because it happened, but because the investigation of it was also being silenced, okay? But this was a war crime. I'm not exaggerating, because this legally fits the definition of a war crime, according to the people within the military itself. I'm not being hyperbolic here. So, but it's interesting that when we try to bring attention to war crimes by the United States, there's not that much demand for it, okay? So it's your job as our audience to help us grow this show, because we don't want to just say the things that there's a demand for, because this is important. So please help us make sure that there are more people that actually pay attention to this. Tell them to watch this, especially this episode. But go on, Ali.
Yeah, so I'll just introduce the topic. I mean, for those who are wondering what we're talking about, and I think that you saw it in the title of the podcast, is that in 2019, and this is like something that has just surfaced now. 2019, there were several bombs that were dropped by the U.S. on a gathering of women and children. Only women and children, right? This is just women and children. So they're clearly civilians. There was a river near a town called Baghuz in Syria. So this is just outside the town. And in this bomb, 70 people were killed. Okay. And the problem is the way that they were killed. So according to, this was a New York Times.
50 to 70. We don't know exactly.
50 to 70. Yeah. So it's, the New York Times says about 70, but let's just, let me just talk about, the important thing is how this was done. So what they're saying, and I'll just read out part of the report from the New York Times. We said, in the last days of the battle against the Islamic State in Syria, when the ISIS was close to being defeated, right? There was a large crowd of women and children that were along this riverbank outside Baghuz, Syria. And without warning, an American F-15E attack jet streaked across the drone's high-definition field of vision. So this was being monitored by a drone, and dropped a 500-pound bomb on the crowd. So there's a crowd of women and children by a river outside Baghuz in Syria, okay? And they drop a bomb on this group of people that's clearly women and children. Okay, so that happens. The smoke clears a little bit, and then there are a few survivors that start stumbling away, right? They're trying to protect themselves, go towards cover. And then there's a jet that's actually tracking them. They're tracking these people going away, and it comes in and drops a 2,000-pound bomb on them. Like, the people who are trying to run away and get cover. Drops a 2,000-pound bomb on them. And then another one, the same second plane comes in, drops a second 2,000-pound bomb. So that's 3 bombs, okay, that went down, and ultimately the most of the survivors were killed as well. So this happened on March 18th, 2019, right? And this was very confusing even to the people, like the Combined Air Operations Center in Qatar. There were people watching this, Americans, the personnel, uniformed personnel, watching the drone footage, and they just looked at it. And they were just wondering. I mean, there was a The New York Times quotes one of the analysts, and he says, who dropped that? He asked. It was on a secure chat system, so they actually have evidence of these communications that happened, right? And they have a chat log, which they documented. And then another one responded in that same chat log, again documented. We said, we just dropped on 50 women and children. An initial battle damage assessment quickly found the number of dead was actually about 70. Okay, so this is something that happened on March 18, 2019. 3 bombs dropped on a crowd exclusively of women and children. Okay, 70 people killed. There were about 50 counted at the time, and nobody heard about it until this report came out.
So a few things I want to add to that. Okay, first of all, if you look at the footage from the area before the bombs were dropped, you could clearly see that this place there are women and children there. Okay, so this was not something that you couldn't see before you dropped the bomb. You could clearly see it. It was obvious that it was visually obvious that there are women and children. Like anybody looking at any footage from the area could see women and children.
Yeah.
Okay.
They knew that too from the chat log. They knew it. I mean, they were talking about it. Yeah.
No. So one thing I want people to understand that there are many other moving factors here. The more you look into this, the more you realize how complicated the military is. Like there are so many different goddamn entities, and it's really hard to make sense of it, right? But the main 2 entities that you have to, at least from the day of the attack, that you have to pay attention to was a Task Force 9. Apparently, that's what it's called. That's the task force that dropped the bomb. Ali, is that correct? Like it was called Task Force 9, and also the command center in Qatar. That it's an observer, like that entity. Apparently, their job is just to have drones in different areas and to observe things. Okay, and these two forces were at the same place at the same time accidentally. Okay, like the command center that was based in Qatar that had drones observing that area, they had no idea that Task Force 9 is coming, and they were dropping these bombs. Like it's just an accident that we have all these footage of this, because there was no communication between these two entities, and they were just observing it. And when the drop was dropped, the people in Qatar, they were like, what the hell just happened? Like they didn't know that this attack was going to happen, right? But I want you guys to pay attention to something Ali said. When the bombs were dropped, even when the first bomb was dropped, it was immediately apparent. This was not something that was later on figured out, that this was like, oh, we just killed a whole bunch of women and children. Right at the beginning, within minute 1, they were like, people in Qatar was like, apparently we just killed a whole bunch of women and children. And when that was apparent, the Task Force 9 that was involved in this attack, they circled around and dropped another 2 bombs just to make sure there are no survivors. Like you could see women and children still surviving, and they wanted to just make sure that they to come out and make sure that there are no survivors. And the people in Qatar were like, what the hell is this? We just committed a war. Our government just committed a war crime. We need to report this. Like the people there decided that it wasn't that they didn't decide to report this and investigate this. It was so obvious that this is a war crime and that needs to be investigated that the people in Qatar like immediately started reporting this up the chains of commands, and it went nowhere. It was suppressed. So they didn't give up. They tried again. I can't remember all of the name of all these investigation units, but every single investigation entity that it was there that you do the reporting to, that their job is to like, oh my God, we need to investigate this. The people in Qatar, they tried up their own change of commands. It was ignored. They went to another investigation force or entity or organization that is responsible for investigating stuff like this. It was suppressed there and silenced, and even people were intimidated and fired, and they had their careers like stopped and stuff. And then they tried another, and again these investigation centers, I don't know what to call them, organizations, centers, units, entities, they're independent from each other, and their job is to investigate this. And every single one of them decided not to something so obvious. Like you don't even have to be like a goddamn like expert. Like, you look at the footage, you can see that women and children are being killed, and they're like up to 50, like 50 to 70 of them, and you would think like stuff a lot more complicated and hard to understand. These investigations organizations, they will look into that, but something so obvious, they decided like, no, we're not going to do this, right? And after all of this, when these people were frustrated why can't they not investigate this, somebody, a lawyer, happened to just accidentally have this on their desk, and they're like, oh my god, this is a war crime, we need to investigate this. And independently from all these other military generals from the command center in Qatar and all, they decided to do their own thing and push it up on other investigation entities and units, which I don't remember because there's so goddamn many of them. Again, the military complex is so complicated. One reason why so many people are not paying attention to this is because it's just so complicated. It's so complicated. But what you need to know is that another attempt by another group of people was done to push this forward, and they also met with a lot of silence and things being thrown in their way and trying to get the silence. Like, there seems to be a complete, like, when you read the story, go read the story by New York Times, you get this idea that everybody is attempting to make you shut the hell up, and they're successful at it. The only reason why they were not successful at it was because these New York Times journalists just happened to see this and go investigate. Like, if these journalists didn't go and figure this out, this would have been completely contained. But go on, Ellie, what do you want to say?
Yeah, no, I wanted to actually corroborate and sort of cement what you said by reading out from the story. Like, everything that you're saying, this is no exaggeration. The fact that they immediately identified it as a war crime. So this is what it says. The details show that the death toll was almost immediately apparent to military officials. A legal officer flagged the strike as a possible war crime that required an investigation. So, legal officer in the military. But at nearly every step, the military made moves that concealed the catastrophic strike. The death toll was downplayed. Reports were delayed, sanitized, and classified. United States-led coalition forces bulldozed the blast site. They actually went to the blast site. They bulldozed it. Okay. And then top leaders were not notified. So even the leaders, like the top political leaders, they didn't even notify them. Right. And then it says the Defense Department's independent inspector general began an inquiry, but the report containing its findings was stalled and stripped of any mention of the strike. So the inquiry was into the strike. They bulldozed the site, and then they basically edited it and they stripped it of. They didn't even mention the strike in the report that was supposed to be an inquiry into the strike. So like, this thing is this is the kind of thing that happens. Honestly, again, this is the United States. This is the kind of thing that happens with Russia. This is the kind of thing that China does. This is not. Yeah, and that's the point I think you were getting to in the beginning of this when you were talking about how we don't do this. But
yeah, but one thing I want to mention is that they wouldn't be doing this if they think that like, these people are not idiots. Okay, like, if you think, well, this would have eventually been leaked. Like, if you actually look at the case and why it was eventually, now why we know it was a pure accident, like a mix of accident and the fact and good journalism by these reporters who managed to get this out. Okay, when you actually look at this, you get the sense of like, this is happening a lot more than we do. This just happened to been leaked out. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard for me not to imagine that there must be a lot more of this that we don't know about, because we got so lucky that we know about this. And again, these people are not idiots. Like, with the way that they were trying to make sure that this doesn't get to higher officials, they wouldn't. If you think that, well, they wouldn't be able to stop it, eventually somebody will find out, and we will find out. Why do you think these generals and all these other people in the military industry, they're dumb, and you recognize something about the whole nature of everything that they don't? They must have had a really good, like, they must have thought that they could get away with this leaking out eventually, right? Another thing I want to point out is that I wish this was like either Biden's or Trump's fault, because the one way that this gets a lot juicier and people get interested in it, if it gets political, right? like one thing that Ali and I were talking about before we went live was that Ali was like, well, this happened during the Trump administration. It's Trump's fault. And I wish it was Trump's fault, because then people would be motivated, because there's so much anti-Trump, or anti-Biden. I don't care which one, which administration was responsible for it. But if this was Trump's fault, there would be motivation for people to highlight this. If this was Biden's fault, it would be motivation for people to highlight it. This was independent from the administration, from which administration was in charge. Okay, the people who are in charge, who are responsible for making this happen, and then eventually trying to silence it, they're still there, right? It doesn't matter whether it was Trump or Biden. They're still part of they're the same people. They didn't change from Trump to Biden. Okay, but it shows to me like how much more attention stuff like this gets if it's politically sexy to talk about, because like people are anti-Trump or anti-Biden, so they have other motive. So when you see like, I don't know, some other war crimes or like injustice happening, whether it's like something against Black people or something against like Trump supporters, and you see so much attention being spent highlighting that, you can tell that it's not that much about the actual people who are being harmed. It's more about it fitting a narrative that arms you as a member of a tribe against another tribe, because when the narrative doesn't help anybody, okay, when the narrative of people dying, this was a war crime, but this narrative doesn't help Trump supporters, it doesn't help Biden supporters, it doesn't help that many people, okay? And again, these are just a bunch of civilians, some far away place. Who cares? Okay, maybe if it was, I don't know, a Trump supporter being bullied, or a Black Lives Matter person or a Black person being bullied by the police, it has so much political capital that it would get a lot more attention. But who cares about, I don't know, 50 or 70 Afghani women and children, especially if the people who bombed them is independent from Biden or Trump administration? Who gives a crap, right? So there is no political capital or interest in talking about this. And that's why we need to talk. That's why we need to actually come and fill that gap. But go on, Elliot.
Mm-hmm. No, I was going to agree with everything you're going to say. Mm-hmm. But so right now, this is one incident that we're talking about, that we're highlighting, right? But the question, Armin, for you is like, we're bringing this up. We've talked about Yemen in the past. We talked about the Kabul bombing and everything. So let's talk a little bit about the pattern, okay? The pattern of these, and as you said, and as you were saying, before when we were talking, is that this is something that seems to be administration independent, okay? The fact that these incidents happen, okay, and they're covered up. Under other administrations, like, we talk about under the Biden administration, you had the whole Kabul, like, the drone. I think that was a drone. Was it a drone that followed the car? And then hit the car?
So actually, this is, and that's another thing me and Ali were talking about before the show, because this happened during Trump's administration, but again, it didn't get high up enough for us for having anything to do with the Trump administration itself. And if you want to be like, oh, maybe this wouldn't have happened under the Biden administration, well, under the Biden administration, again, this has more to do with the military industry rather than Biden or Trump. We had the Kabul drone strike, which killed 10 civilians, 7 of them children, and every single thing about the reports from the military about what actually happened was false. Nothing they said about what actually happened was false until there was journalists came. Like, the similarities between what happened in Kabul and what happened here in Syria is that it was never the military. Like, what the Biden administration or Trump administration or the Pentagon keeps telling us is that they have the systems in place to hold themselves accountable, to make sure that the civilians are not dying. But you can see that the actual attempt when it comes to these investigatory bodies is that not to actually hold yourself accountable, but to protect the people who were responsible for doing acts like this. And it was never the systems that the military introduced itself for observing itself that actually managed to get the information out. It was journalists outside of the military, both during the Kabul strike and now the Syria strike in 2019, both of them, it was other people that managed to leak this information. And a lot of it was just happened to be just luck, right? So again, if that drone strike in Kabul that killed all that civilians, the military had no motivation in actually telling us the truth, and it was journalists that gave us the truth. And again, this one in Syria, the military had no motivation in telling us the truth, and it was journalists who actually managed to figure this out as well. That shows that there's a lot of this happening. A lot of the drone strikes, either under Bush, under Obama, under Biden, under Trump, a lot of it is killing more civilians than they're telling us. We're just happening to be hearing about the ones that journalists managed to unearth for us. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go on.
No, I was saying, who knows how much? And this is a point I think I just want to make, and maybe this is worth a whole other episode. Is that this New York Times report, Arvind, is so phenomenal. Like the investigative journalism that was done here. I mean, this is stuff that everybody in the highest positions of power tried to sweep under the rug. Again, I just keep on thinking about how they bulldozed the blast site. I mean, that's insane to me. They actually went and physically bulldozed it. And they got construction equipment to get rid of the evidence. And then you have these journalists in the New York Times to go and uncover it. And there's so much talk about the mainstream media, this mainstream media, that, and, you know, people online, like, you know, your Dave Rubins, all these people coming up and saying, well, you know, we are an alternative to, you're not, there's no way you are an alternative to this kind of reporting. Like, yes, the superficial, there's a lot of BS happening, you know, with all of the, you know, the woke language and trying to, all this other crap that's happening on the surface that we see. But behind the scenes, I mean, some of the people who are doing this work at some of these outlets, like, you know, the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, even, you know, conservative outlets, like they're doing phenomenal work. It's incredible. And this is the only way we'd find out about this. How else would we find out about this? You're not going to hear about this on Vox or on Breitbart, you know? So when we have this whole thing about the mainstream media, and I'll just close with this. Like I've written I remember writing the piece on Raif Badawi for CNN.com, and my back and forth with the editor, like, you know, I said something about, you know, hand amputations in Saudi Arabia. And everybody knew that was true, but they made me provide at least 2 or 3 references to show that it is happening there, even though there's no, like, they're so incredibly rigorous with stuff, and they retract anytime they make an error, you know, they'll put out the thing immediately. There's no competition in this whole, you know, sort of modern media and everything. I think what we do here on Secular Jihadists is that we provide a kind of analysis that you probably don't see anywhere else. In fact, I'm pretty certain that you don't see anywhere else. But this, you know, undermining, this is just another reminder of how important, you know, journalism is. It's very easy to crap on it nowadays, but it's just good investigative journalism is just absolutely key to everything that we're doing.
Yeah, so I could not agree with you more, Ali. Like, I actually wanted to mention this, and I'm so glad that you are actually emphasizing this as well. Is because here's the thing: we don't bullshit you, okay? We are alternative media, but what me and Ellie are doing on YouTube, we have a show, we have a podcast. This is alternative media, okay? But what we don't tell you is that, oh, alternative media is better than mainstream media. You should give up on mainstream media and just rely. Like, it would be nice for us to say, like, oh yeah, forget CNN, forget New York Times, forget all of these mainstream media. Alternative media, they're lying to you. They're all lying to you. Alternative media is the way to go. Like, you know how a lot of people say that, like Dave Rubin, Kyle Kulinski, like, and it's so amazing because all the things that they comment on, all the things, Ali, me and you are commenting on, all the things that people like Kyle Kulinski are commenting on, all the things that Dave Rubin is commenting on, they wouldn't have that information if it wasn't because of mainstream media, which has the resources. And guys, we're not talking, when we talk about journalists, we're not talking about rich people who are like doing this for money. These people are not that well off. Like, these are people, a lot of these journalists are people who actually believe in what they're doing, okay, and doing it against their own interests, okay. A lot of these things that they investigate is actually career-ending dangerous behavior, okay. But what we comment on is in our living room, in our bedroom, and just sitting there, is because other people are going and taking a lot of risk, right? Like when you look at the CNN, like, oh, CNN is fake news. Oh yeah, sure, but you have this woman in Afghanistan, where everybody, when Afghans are trying to leave Afghanistan, like when you hear about Taliban, oh, Taliban is anti-woman, and you have the CNN journalist right in the middle of danger zone, just running after Taliban just to be able to interview them. I don't know, like how, like I don't know how. I don't have that courage, okay? And like we have information because they have people there on the ground. Where is alternative media? Doesn't have that. Alternative media doesn't even have people that are willing to do that. So they are feeding us information that we could just sit here and comment on for you guys, and we're like, oh, we're biting the hand that is like feeding us for free, okay? Like they're not even like. We owe them. Guys. Investigative journalism is something you need to celebrate, okay? Because that is one of the main ways that you have actually human rights endorsed and democracy withheld, okay? You can't do that. You can't, as you see today, there is no way that you can trust governments, even governments who claim that they are going to lead with human rights in mind. You cannot trust them to hold themselves accountable. The only weapon that civilians have is investigative journalism that is being provided to us by mainstream media, okay? So we as alternative media, we're not going to come and pretend like people like Kyle Kulinski or Dave Rubin that, oh yeah, don't worry, don't rely on mainstream media. We're just going to come and give it. We don't, okay? They even like people as big as Kyle Kulinski and Dave Rubin, they have nothing. They have no resources and nobody that is willing to take the risk of people that mainstream media has. Okay, so yeah.
I know that I also one last thing on this is that it also doesn't work the way that people think they do. Like just look at what was the reason that Hillary Clinton lost the election? Her main scandal, Armin. What was the main scandal that Hillary Clinton had the entire election? The emails. Who broke the email story? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
The New York Times. The New York Times broke the email story. When it resurfaced, they're the ones who came and they broke it again. They basically sunk her candidacy. But at the same time, the New York Times op-eds were talking about how, this is we shouldn't be focusing on this that much, considering, what's happening on the other side. But at the same time, it was the New York Times that was actually going out and doing this. So investigative journalism, opinion, and editorials and all of those things are completely separate. They're compartmentalized, even in these mainstream outlets. So anyway, it's very important to understand how these structures work, so you have a good idea of it. And I think that it may be worth talking about this at some point too, maybe even with a media expert. But let's get back to this. I think the pattern of covering up what is why would the U.S. do this? Why would it cover up these things? Do they actually?
It's not because there's no such thing as the U.S. These are people in the military industry that are responsible for keeping themselves powerful and influential, and getting the public to investigate this and getting Congress to pressure them. It just threatens their livelihood, their power, their wealth. So it's not like. A lot of people, when they analyze stuff like this, they talk about like the US or Iran or Russia or like China as if they're one entity and they have one singular international goal, and they're trying to make sense of everything from this longer term international planning or like motivation that this one entity that is the United States has. And if you do that, there will be you will get so many contradictory results. You have to think about this as individuals with contradictory goals trying to stay in power, and if you look at it that way, things make a lot more sense.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But
go ahead.
Another thing that is one other thing that will jump at you if you not read the story by New York Times is that you would think, like, if you don't know how things work within the military, is that it would take for these information to get leaked out. Like, you would hope that, okay, even if the entire system is motivated to cover stuff up like this, right? As long as you have a few good men within that system that would speak up, we will be okay, right? But what you get from reading the story is that's not actually true, because you had within the military system, according to the story, you had a whole bunch of good men that were working in the military, and they were like, we need to investigate this. We just committed a war crime. And even with that element in place, they were successful at covering it up. So what I'm saying is that it actually takes a lot more than having the military filled with a whole bunch of heroes. Like, we had heroes. This story had heroes within the military that saw that this, and they were not okay with it, and they wanted to push back against all of this cover up. And that was not enough. They were still extremely successful at making this, at covering this up. Have it not been for these journalists from New York Times, they would have been successful, right? So, and a whole bunch of other factors that were completely accidental. That is what's scary, Ali. That's what's scary. Like, because I assume, like, oh, you have the system that's trying to cover this up, but yeah, we have, like, you can't have, obviously not everybody in the military system, they're not all goddamn evil. You know, like, it's not like, this is not like a cartoonishly evil institution that doesn't have a single good person working there. Obviously, there are good people there. So with that thought process, I was like, if you have some good people working there, when war crimes happen, this information will come out, because not everybody there would be okay with it. But what we see is that's not true. Yes, it is true that within the military you have a whole bunch of good people there, but that's not enough. That is not nearly enough for you to be able to get any level of accountability. And here's another thing, Ali. There is not going to be any accountability, even after all of this. So the amazing thing is that even in rare cases like this, where we actually see what happened, and when journalists and some accidents and some lawyers eventually come together and make stars align in a way that we peek behind the curtain and we see skeletons, literal skeletons. We see like what's happening, and we're like, oh my God, this is one of those cases we got lucky, and this is now got out. Okay, good. So at least in this case, there will be accountability. No, you're wrong. Even with information eventually leaking and this being a PR nightmare for the military, nobody is going to be held accountable. Not with this 2019 strike under the Trump administration, neither with the Kabul strike in August under the Biden administration. Nothing happened after all of that leak information. There's nobody that is losing, higher ups that are losing their position, or somebody going to jail. These are war crimes that were actively being covered up, and even after the information is leaked to the public, nothing is gonna happen. You know why? You know why? Because there's no outrage. No, because of the
public
people.
Yeah.
There's
no hashtags. There's no hashtags. There's nobody outraged about this. They're all really, really concerned about, I don't know, how someone dead named somebody at like an award show, right? And the attention span for any kind of outrage is what is the attention span? It's about 3 days, right? 3 days in the media cycle, and then everything dies out. Everything dies out after 3 days. So that's basically what it is. They know that. They know. I mean, there's like, the people that I know who are working in the political world, anytime a scandal hits or something, they're like, okay, just give it 3 days, stay quiet, don't respond, don't do anything, and then it'll all come back. It'll be fine. Right? The outrage doesn't last. I mean, they're more concerned about, like, say, Jeffrey Toobin like masturbating on a Zoom call. Right? That's like a huge news story. So this stuff gets covered up and nobody really cares. But Armin, I wanted to ask you another part of this report, right? That's really, I guess it's really eye-catching, right? And this is the response of CIA to this, right? So there was, again, from the report, it says human rights groups were not the only ones sounding the alarm. CIA officers working in Syria grew so alarmed over the task force's strikes that agents reported their concern to the Department of Defense Inspector General, which investigated the claims and produced a report. Now, the results of this report are top secret. Hold on. But the former task force officer who reviewed the report said that the CIA officers alleged that in about 10 incidents, the secretive task force hit targets knowing civilians would be killed. They knew the civilians would be killed. And the former officer said the report determined that all the strikes were legal. So they're legal strikes. Now, again, this is complicated because, they have this term collateral damage. And
this is not collateral damage. This was not a case of collateral damage.
This wasn't. Not this strike. But what they're saying is,
this was a case of like killing nothing but what they call collateral damage.
Yeah, but they're talking about other incidents that had happened where civilians were killed, and the CIA officers alleged in this case, right? In those cases, that out of 10 of those incidents, 10 of those strikes, I'm assuming that the task force had hit targets knowing that civilians would be killed. So there's a question here. I mean, if you have a high value target, okay, and you are going to, supposing, you're like back in the days when the Taliban were, pretty much terrorizing all of Waziristan. So now you're going in and you're trying to take out the Taliban, and you know that there's about 10 civilians in the area that are going to be killed. Or like, when Anwar al-Awlaki, his son was there, his son was a civilian, and they said, and Obama took him out, and that they knew that he was going to be killed. What do you do? Is there is there any basis for saying, okay, this is still a legal strike, even though we knew civilians were going to be killed? Because we didn't do it, then more civilians would have been killed by these people. How do you process that?
All right, so
from an ethical standpoint,
yeah, from an ethical standpoint, I'm going to tell you how far away we are from that discussion. Okay, let me tell you. First of all, it's amazing that this Task Force 9 was doing that. Still continues to operate, by the way, was so bad that the CIA had to complain about it. Like the CIA had to come out and be like, these people are just killing civilians, just left and right. Okay. And this, by the way, nothing is going to happen. Even with the CIA complaining about them, nothing is going to happen. But here's an interesting thing, Ali. We usually have an ethical discussion about, okay, what level of collateral damage is okay, given that what you're taking out is going to cause more harm than the collateral damage that you inflict upon, that's based with one strike. Like you do a cost benefit analysis, right? And you do a lot of moral dilemma questions, and you weigh in different moral philosophical discussions. Which are you utilitarian? Are you like based on principles? Blah blah blah. That is a discussion that a lot of people have. We are so far away from that. Because what we are realizing now, based on these reports, is that the discussion is not even there. There doesn't that would be an interesting discussion to have when there's an attempt to minimize collateral damage. Okay, because you're actually eliminating something that is harmful. What we are noticing is the absence of that attempt. Right. So because, for example, do you understand what I'm saying? Because Ali,
yeah, I know
that because that like if you were attempting to minimize collateral damage, right, then you would be like, okay, then what is the level of collateral damage that we're okay with, right? But like imagine the Kabul strike, okay? After the Kabul strike, after everything was leaked out, after people will realize that everything the militaries told us about that strike, every single information about that strike was false. After the military came out and like, oopsie, we did an oopsie, sorry, okay? We made a mistake. After we saw that there's nobody that is going to be held accountable for that strike, okay? After, unless they get pressure, maybe they will be eventually when there's pressure, but the military itself shows zero motivation to hold anybody accountable. After all of that, they still had the audacity to come out and say that was a legitimate strike, given the situation at the time. Yeah. A strike that killed nothing but civilians. They were not collateral damage because there were no terrorists killed and there were civilians happened to be on the side. There were nothing but civilians killed, 7 of them children. They still had the audacity to be like, actually, after all of this, that was a legit strike, okay? So if they consider that not just a legal strike, but a legitimate strike, okay, given the situation that we were facing at the time, given that the threat levels and blah blah blah, okay, given that everybody could see after investigating that you could just look at the footage and see that they were carrying water. If you just actually paid attention before the strike, you could see that this is just civilians and nothing but civilians. Then we don't even have to start discussing what is the level of civilian casualty that is acceptable, because we're not even. That's not the discussion we should be having, because that's the discussion that you would be having if you show that there's a legitimate active attempt in reducing civilian casualties. That attempt doesn't exist, so that shouldn't be the moral discussion that we should be having. Do you know what I mean?
These things are. I'll give you an interesting analogy, because what you have is the people, the task forces, and the investigative committees that are deciding whether these are good shoots or good strikes or bad strikes, whatever, legal or justified, are actually they're all connected to each other. It's like they're making decisions pretty much on their own people, and you see this, and people don't think that this is real, but just working in hospitals as a pathologist, you have, if you're doing an autopsy on someone who died potentially of a medical error, supposing they had like an aortic graft that started leaking and they died because of it. A lot of times you'd be doing the autopsy and then the surgeon would come down who did the surgery, and the surgeon's like kind of shitting bricks. They're like, okay, well, I don't want to get sued. I want to make sure that this guy didn't die because of some mistake that I made. And, they'd talk to the pathologist, they'd have a conference officially, and then they would come up with a way to frame the report in a way that would sort of like cover the surgeon's ass. And this is something that is not uncommon at all. Okay. People know each other. Like people who are medical pathologists, they know the surgeons. People who are forensic pathologists, they work very closely with law enforcement and police. I mean, these are not uncommon things. And there are ways to use language and write reports that do cover for your colleagues in other departments. So a lot of times when you have these oversight committees that are trying to, an independent task force is investigating things, like a lot of times this stuff is bullshit. It's not. And it's very easy to say these things and you're like, okay, this is what we'll say to the public, because there's nobody over them. There's nobody overseeing them. And they're the ones who are kind of overseeing themselves and their own colleagues, which are not under them, but are sort of lateral to them. Right. And this happens. It's what do you do about it? What do you do about it? You don't. And this is where you need the journalists. This is where you need the investigative journalists to come out and dig. And it's not easy because, again, you have people who have the power and ability to completely hide this information without anybody knowing. And you have to still dig this information out of them. And that's what investigative journalists do. And that's why you need them so badly. Otherwise, I mean, who knows how many, like, you said, Armin, like, who knows how many civilian casualties have really happened. I mean, I was the first one to talk about how these drones, like, the official stats that are coming out from all these sources, like, the drone attacks, and there aren't that many civilian casualties, which is actually numerically true. Drone strikes compared to military jets and everything, there aren't. But now you wonder, okay, well, this is one thing where they found out. What about how many other blast sites were bulldozed that we didn't hear about?
Right. So that's that. Okay, so let me respond to that. That's very, very good points. I think it takes beyond just journalism, okay? Because part of the problem is that even if we get more journalism and this information comes out, there is a black and white thinking among people on either side of these conversations, that the black and white thinking leads to a certain amount of numbness. Okay, let me explain what I'm talking about. Right. So let's say some information like this comes out, and you generally have two camps of people who either think that the United States government is such a force of evil that what the hell did you expect? Like this report comes out and it does nothing for you because, like, it's the U.S. government is just pure evil. Did I really need some investigative journalism to be able to tell me that? I know they just randomly kill civilians with no problem all the time. I didn't need journalists to tell me this. Like, they have such a pure evil view of the U.S. government that this report does nothing to them. And then you have other side of a bunch of people who might think like the United States government is the kind of government that does more than anyone else to reduce collateral damage. And yes, we're going to have civilians deaths that are unfortunate, but this is, but trying to demonize the US government is just an attempt to exaggerate how evil the US government is, but relative to everybody else, the United States government is a force for good, and therefore, like, this is just expected, this is just war, this is just like what you expect in war, civilians die, war is ugly, obviously, so this report does nothing for them as well. Okay, the mindset that we need to introduce to people that is neither of these is that it's to stop thinking in black and white and realize that this is a sliding scale. Okay, it's not either will we have war crimes all the time or no war crimes ever. Okay, you could have, with the proper amount of pressure and backlash and outrage, you are going to be able to have less war crimes. It does have an effect. Okay, you individuals as a political force that has powers with your voice, especially if you're a Canadian or American or a European citizen, your voice actually, believe it or not, carries more weight than most other citizens on this planet. So it's not like this idea that your voice has no influence, your vote has no influence, is absolutely ridiculous. It's not going to move mountains, but it does have an influence. And again, if you think, well, they're just killing people, it doesn't matter. Yeah, really, like you think like war crimes, having like, I don't know, 1,000 civilians dead versus 10,000 civilians dead is just the same thing. You just think like, oh, well, it's just a 9,000 more extra civilians. Well, it's just war. Like, again, I think like our brains have been, evolved in a way like naturally to just look at things black and white, so we can't just see the difference between one in a battle 1,000 civilians dying or 10,000 civilians dying. We just treat them as like, oh, this was an unfortunate tragedy that civilians died in, right? Overall, like we can't see like, oh my god, these are completely two different things. These are hugely different things. 10,000 versus 1,000. It's not just a black thing. Oh yeah, it's just the tragedy of war. This is extremely different levels of tragedy of war. So you can't treat like, no, United States is not just a force for pure evil. No, United States is not just a force for all good, and it's better than every, like it's neither of those things. It's a sliding scale that depends on you who are listening. And even if you're like just hashtags, social goddamn media, okay, it's useful. We have shown that it has influence. It's not like, some bunch of Twitter activists that don't have no influence. Guess what? No, you do have an influence. You're actually talking about these things, sharing these stories does have an influence. Again, just like I said, you can't look at the entire U.S. government as just one entity. The people within the military, they have some influence. The people within Congress, they have some other competing influence, okay? For example, if you're pressuring Congress people, their interests will now contradict, because yes, the military has an influence over Congress, but we saw like Congress has an oversight role, okay? Congress, one of the roles of Congress in the United States is to have an oversight role over actions exactly like this, okay? And even though these reports did show up on Congress's desk, they didn't do much with it. They didn't do anything with it, right? Because there's no motivation for them to do so. Because again, Congress, as individual members of Congress, their main goal is to get reelected. If you, as an American citizen that has the power to get them elected or not to get them elected, don't give a crap about this, guess what? They're not going to give a crap about it, because you don't give a crap about it. So here's another thing. Before blaming the United States government, maybe blame yourself a little bit, okay? Why would your congressman care about this if you don't happen to care about it? You're the person that decides whether they keep their job or not. Why would they care about? Again, I'm not saying that this is a perfect democracy where your voice has the ultimate say. No, the military's role in what the congressperson pays attention obviously has a major influence. There's lobbyists. There are jobs that they could be looking forward to after they leave Congress because how much they cozy up to the military. Obviously, all of that has a role. But again, even in that situation, it's not black and white. It's not that you have zero influence and the military has all the influence. And it's not a perfect democracy where you have all the influence and lobbyists have no influence. Our different forces are fighting with each other. And if you give up, the power that you have, well, guess what? Now it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You had the black and white mentality, and because you washed your hands off of it, it became closer to that black and white situation that you looked at everything. Yes, it becomes their influence has none of your influence. Again, the outrage is the key. You have to show outrage. This is your government. These are your governments, depending on where you live, that are violating human rights, that are killing civilians with your tax money. With your tax money, you paid for this. If you don't hold your politicians accountable for this, then you are part of the problem. Anyways, that was a rant. You're muted, Ellie.
Crap, sorry. Yeah, I was just I was just messaging a friend about this, and so sometimes like the reaction to this is, and I don't blame anybody for this kind of reaction. They'll say, well, I guess that's not surprising. And this is something people say this a lot. Like when they look at it, well, it's not surprising. Yeah, the US did it again. But this is the kind of sentiment that I think people count on. They know that people just kind of shrug their shoulders. Well, this is what they do. What are you going to do? And then when people become resigned and they're not surprised by it anymore, that means that they're desensitized to it. They just shrug their shoulders and they move on because they've just accepted this narrative. This is a problem. I want to explain this properly. I'm trying to be as articulate as I can. But this is a problem when you start thinking to say, the United States is superpower and they do whatever they want and they're just overall evil and they do this kind of crap all the time, kill civilians. When you've accepted that as an immutable narrative, okay, and then when things like this happen, like, well, I'm not surprised, the U.S. is like this is what the U.S. does, then you are pretty much giving people the license, that you're giving the U.S. the license to be able to do this without people being surprised. People have to be surprised by this. If anything's going to change, you have to be surprised by this. You can't be desensitized. You can't just shrug your shoulders and say, well, that's how it is. Because the more you do that, the more this keeps on happening. You have to, these things have to be challenged. I mean, if this is the way that, if the journalists and everything, if that's what they thought, okay, this is just an evil country with an evil past and everything, then there genuinely would not be any accountability, even among journalists and even among the people who uncover these things. So this is stuff that we have to continue to be sensitized to, and not just sort of give up and resign ourselves to the fact that, okay, this isn't surprising anymore.
I do want to mention, for the sake of not being black and white and not just like talking about things as if they're purely good or purely evil, and why this is a bigger deal than just one horrible strike. It's actually bigger than that. Is that you do have to realize, again, this is going to sound weird after all saying all of this. It's going to seem like contradictory to everything that we just said.
Well, I can't wait.
But it's the truth, okay? The role of U.S. hegemony has been more peace in the world, okay? It has been a stabilizing factor, okay? It has led to human rights becoming a bigger metric, a more important standard at which more countries operate by than if the U.S. hegemony was not a thing, okay? The international, having a U.S. hegemony around the world and not having that challenged for a while has been why international norms have shifted towards human rights mattering more. This is truth, okay? So you might, after all of this, us saying how United States has done such a horrible thing, you might think that's contradictory to what you're saying, but this is just the case, okay? And we could I do want to maybe have an entire episode about talking about this whole U.S. hegemony and its influence and all the discussions around that. Okay,
yeah, let's do it.
Why? Yeah, yeah, that would be an interesting topic. But the fact that is the case shows why it's important for U.S. as the hegemon right now to be more effective at what it does. And it's extremely ineffective because of its bad track record. Do you know what I mean? So we don't like holding United States responsible when it commits war crimes like this. It might be even more important than holding Saudi Arabia, Iran, or China or Russia responsible. Because when United States has continuously done things that it loses its credibility, like partnering up with Saudi Arabia in the war and being responsible for the greatest human rights violation, for example, in Yemen, and having countless of examples of things like this, starting from Vietnam and then now like in Iraq and in Cambodia, never forget Cambodia, and in Syria and in Afghanistan. When you have countless examples of this, then that force that is the UN hegemon that is supposed to be having a normalization of human rights and creating more stability and peace, it will become extremely less effective, right? It will become extremely less effective. This is not this is against the interest of the United States as well. Even if you want to speak about this purely from from a strategic perspective and not a human rights perspective. This is horrible from a PR perspective. If you want to be okay, let's say that you are completely thinking about this from a strategic perspective and human lives don't matter to you. Okay, if you want to be a more powerful force against China, against Iran, okay, against Russia, okay, then the PR matters. The PR matters, and you are losing the PR battle when you do stuff like this.
Sorry, I unmuted. Yeah, I think that, I don't know. I think that this is a conversation we should continue to have. Oh, where'd you go? No, Armin's gone. Oh, never mind. Yeah, so we're basically at 1 more minute, so we're gonna wrap it up over here.
No, can you read the Patreon? Sorry, I just had to check something for a second. Can you let's read the Patreon questions and then we go.
Oh, were there any Patreon questions?
No, they're comments.
Oh, Patreon comments. Okay, so let's do that.
Let me read just a few last ones. Yeah, let's read this one.
Right. So D. Boudreau is saying Americans don't care about what happens outside of our borders. If I try to strike up a conversation with coworkers, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I think that, yeah, I understand why you're saying that, D, but I mean, there's, again, we're talking about, to Armin's point about things being black and white. Americans actually, even though they don't necessarily, they're not always aware about all of the conflicts and everything that are happening outside, there is a lot to keep track of, and the regular person really can't do it. Americans do have a lot of, for instance, with, when it comes to Syrian refugees, when it comes to everything else, humanitarian efforts are the vast majority of humanitarian efforts that are happening outside that are not necessarily like, government endorsed, are actually American humanitarian efforts. So there's a lot of Americans that do care a lot about what happens outside of U.S. borders. But when it comes to things like this, a lot of times they're just ignorant, right? And they don't really know. And it also depends. Americans is also a very wide term. So this is also it's not a totally black and white phenomenon. Right. So but you're right. Like if you try to strike up these workers with coworkers, these ideas with coworkers, they're not going to get it. I think the way that things are packaged nowadays, there has to be some sort of entertainment, some sort of pizzazz, breaking news. This is what happened. This many people died. There's a kind of disaster porn kind of thing that's going on in the news nowadays, especially with all these cable channels trying to fight for ratings, and it's a drug. People, if they don't get that kind of, how you need a certain kind of high from a drug, and if you don't get it, it doesn't interest you. Maybe it's a matter of, and right now, we've talked about this a lot in this podcast, maybe it's a matter of how you tell the story. It's not just a story, but it's how you tell the story. And maybe it does need to cater to, having news stories that are serious, being presented in a way that has the same kind of stopping power that a really interesting documentary would have in your Netflix queue, where you'd want to tap on it. So, I mean, that's also another conversation that, when you, how do you present these stories? How do you tell these stories so that people become more interested, more invested in them? No, that's my opinion. Music guy saying that. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so no, this is actually something very important. Like Music Guy is saying, this is why the U.S. isn't part of the ICC, so in the International Criminal Court. That's what he's referring to. And here's a very interesting thing. I mean, actually, if I was a U.S. president, the first thing I would do and fail at it was to join the ICC. Okay, and definitely, I never say definitely, but I would suspect that I would fail at it, because the power at B that won't want to hold all of the U.S. military accountable are greater than the president. So, but the mere attempt at pushing for United States joining the ICC and failing at it, even if you fail at it, I think will say a lot to more people about, where the power lies in the United States. So even though that I know it's not going to be possible, I would still think like it would be worth it to just make the attempt, fail at it, and make a statement by failing at it, to try to join the ICC. Do you have any opinions on this?
Yeah, I just hope you become president.
I'm not. Yeah, it's funny.
Music guys also saying it also shows that there isn't a system in place to prevent these atrocities.
Actually, Music Guy,
Yeah, go ahead.
Music Guy, it's actually worse than that. It shows that there is a system in place to actively try to cover it up by the exact system that we're supposed to do opposite. So the systems that are in place that are trying to prevent it are actually participating in trying to cover up, which is worse than what you're saying.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like the system that's actually committing the atrocities is the same system that's being tasked to cover it up. And this is what I was saying about the the pathologist and the surgeon, right? I mean, it's all part eventually of the same thing, but they've kind of said, oh, we're going to do oversight for each other, and it just doesn't work out.
Yeah. Anyways, that was it. Thank you guys. Please make sure that you try to help us grow this channel. I think we are saying stuff that more people need to hear. One thing I could say about mainstream media, as much as we celebrated them this way, because they need to be unbiased. They don't talk about it the way we talk about it to you guys, like with the moral outrage that is required, especially because it's not their job, right? They're supposed to be just giving you the news. But I think like at least what we could contribute is part of the like a fire under your ass kind of like a part of the equation that I think like maybe mainstream media is not able to do so. So if you think there's any value in that, please share this podcast. Tell more people that we're covering something that more people need to hear about. And if you're interested in supporting what we do, consider becoming a patron and supporting the show with as little as $1 a month. The benefit from that is that you get to join us here live on air and talk to us while we're covering this, and ask your questions even ahead of time. If you are can't join us live as a patron, you can send us your question before we go live on air, and we do make sure that we read them while we are on air.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Marcy's here as well. Thank you. Marcy's saying hit that like button.
Yes. Please
molest the like button.
If you are watching this or listening to this on YouTube, please hit the like button. It just takes a second. Just go down. Take a second right now. You're listening to this. We're about to shut down. Just go hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button if you want to be notified every time we do more videos like this. And we will be doing a lot more videos like this. I think this is a really important topic because it's a topic about accountability. Okay. And I think that's one of the most important things that we need right now across. I mean, it's not just here, it's across the board. So we're probably going to have more conversations like this in the future as well. But
Music Guy is saying good stream, gentlemen. He's also saying Armin 2024. I'm not American, so I don't know. D saying I don't know why the stream isn't super popular. Thanks, Guy. Thank you. Thank you, D. She's sending us a heart as well. That's
sweet. Thank you, guys.
Anyways, we're gonna go.
All right. See you next week. Right. Be best.
See you guys. Be best, everyone. Bye.
The Secular Jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadist.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.